Brandin Podziemski still taking shots at Brad Underwood years later. Let it go, brother.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Locked On Illini, your first listen every single day. Just a simple reminder, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Sunny Verma. You can find me at IlliniCast if you'd like to banter about Illini sports, or you can find me at the Sunny V if you want to talk sports in general. If you'd like to support the show, simple like, simple subscribe. That's all it takes. Does not cost you anything. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today's going to be a fun episode. Once again, all right, let's just go ahead and get started. You would think after transferring to a school, becoming an all-conference player, becoming an NBA draft pick, being drafted by one of the elite franchises in the NBA, and now spending your summer on the USA Select team, going up against the Team USA every single day, that life would be pretty good if you're Brandin Podziemski. But apparently it's not good enough to not still take shots every now and then at your former coach, Brad Underwood. Now, how did this get started? A couple days ago, noted college basketball personality Ant Wright made a very simple tweet saying, "This is crazy to look at." And then he provided a screenshot of that Illini team that Brandin was a freshman part of. Obviously, the highlight of that screenshot was really the lack of playing time and lack of production from Brandin that freshman season. Now, if you're a brand new Illini fan and you don't know quite the story, Brandin played very seldomly for the Illini his freshman season. Then during the offseason, he ended up transferring to Santa Clara. Santa Clara, he played fantastic. He was one of the best players in the conference, played his way to the NBA, got drafted by the Golden State Warriors, and again, as I said, is now a part of the USA Team Select team. This is kind of a reoccurring story now. I mean, as much as things seem like they were okay between the staff and Brandin, and Brandin's father's always been very supportive of the Illini on the social media, obviously this is something that still triggers Brandin. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think it's this sort of energy that he has that he uses to have become the player that he is today. Maybe he genuinely thought that, hey, Brad Underwood does not think I'm good enough, and that forced him to shoot 1,000 shots every single day and become a better player at Santa Clara. And now, obviously, he may still use it as fuel now that he's playing at the highest level possible. But I need to get something out of this. This happens so often. Every single time, Illini Nation needs to feel compelled to come to the defense of Brad Underwood and the staff, because it's almost like the rest of the basketball world is picking on, is laughing at. That's understandably the case, because we're talking about, I've mentioned this before, trolling Illini fans can pay your bills online. I'm not mad at Ant Wright. Ant Wright knows he just has to tweet a couple of words, a screenshot, and he's going to get a crazy amount of interactions on that tweet. That tweet that I mentioned, which I think was only like 5 words, he got 430,000 pieces of engagement on it as of this recording. Illini fans, they'll pay your rent. I'm not mad at Ant. Ant is just trying to get paid. He's doing his thing. But Brandin, come on, man. And truthfully, if we're keeping it 100 on this show, like we always do, Brad Underwood was right. Take a look at that roster. Brandin was a wing. Okay? Our backcourt was Andre Curbelo and Trent Frazier. Trent Frazier was one of the best defenders in all of college basketball, a staple in the Illini lineup. Andre Curbelo was, sure, obviously his career took a turn, if I'm going to phrase it politely. But still, that freshman year, it looked like he was going to be a superstar for the Illini. Jacob Grandison was a senior who also provided that three-point shooting and veteran leadership. Alfonso Plummer, you guys remember him? Lightning quick shot, one of the best three-point shooters in the entire country. He was the second leading scorer on that team, averaging 14.5 points. Now, which one of those guys was Brandin going to play over? I'll also mention, this wasn't a team that was a middling Big Ten team, a team that finished 500. This was a team that won the Big Ten Conference. Sure, the team lost to Houston in the postseason, but Houston was a very good basketball team in their own right that year, and they seemed to be every single year. There was no role for Brandin on that team, and when Brandin did play, it's not like he was shooting lights out. When he did have playing time on the court, no Illini fan was like looking around like, hey, why is this guy not playing more often? It's because we had A, good college basketball players, and B, veteran college basketball players. And C, we were competing for a conference championship, which we won. Brad Underwood did his job. In the offseason, obviously conversations happened and it didn't quite work out. And Brandin decided to go play elsewhere. And now I don't mean this with any sort of disrespect, so I hope it's not taken this way. But note where he ended up. Santa Clara. We're not talking about another Big Ten team, another Big 12 team, a big program. He took a step down in level of competition. What does that tell you? That tells you other coach who's seen the game tape probably thought the same thing as Brad Underwood did. That Brandin was a very good talent, but maybe better suited at a lower level. And now, don't get me wrong, Brandin killed it at Santa Clara. And ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, of course, Brad Underwood would probably like to redo that whole situation. But you know what? Brad's moved on. Brandin, you're making millions. You're playing next to one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Listen, it's time for you to move on. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, before we get started, a simple reminder, I'm going to be doing a mailbag episode very, very soon. So if there's any particular questions you had in mind, drop it in the chat. I'll kind of earmark it for the future, and I'll try to have it answered for you. As always, I really appreciate all the feedback I get in that chat. So even if you just want to say hello, please do so. It makes doing this a lot easier. All right, so football season is less than 2 months away. Brett Bielema and company are about to undertake what could be one of the most important seasons of Brett's career. We're talking about a season where, again, we're projected. Las Vegas has the Illini projected at 5.5 wins. And last week, we kind of talked about their out-of-conference schedule with Big Ten Ted, where they played Eastern Illinois, Kansas, and Central Michigan. Well, this week, we're going to discuss their Big Ten schedule, which they'll kick off with two games on the road at Nebraska and at Penn State. Then they come home for 2 games playing Purdue and Michigan. And then they go to Oregon. And then they have 2 more games at home playing Minnesota and Michigan State. And then they play at Rutgers. And then the final game will be against Northwestern in Wrigley Field. So taking a look at that schedule, we talked about how Kansas was probably clearly the most interesting game out of conference slate. And so taking a look at the in-conference slate, I wanted to kind of pick and choose which game I thought was going to be the most important. And I want to hear your thoughts. Put it in the chat who you think is almost a must-win for the Illini, because to me, there's a clear-cut team, a game that we 100% have to win. And that is against our neighbors to the east in West Lafayette, Purdue. Ryan Walters didn't necessarily have the greatest first season as head coach. Purdue finished, I believe, last in the Big Ten last year. But there's a real sense of optimism amongst Purdue fans. Ryan Walters is recruiting better than Brome ever did. It seems like Ryan has been able to cash in on the success of the Illini secondary players getting drafted into the NFL more so than Brett has. They've been locking down 4 stars. I believe they even got a 5-star in this past recruiting cycle. And that's important because Illinois and Purdue are battling for the same type of recruit. We're not only just the same tier program when it comes to football, but we're 100 miles from each other. We are literally directly competing in almost every facet of the sport, of all sports, whether it is basketball or football. Perception is important. Purdue won 4 games last year. And the perception of the Boilermaker program is that they're on their way up, that they're an up-and-coming team with an up-and-coming head coach. The Illini won 5 games last year. And their perception, at least from what I've seen from the national media, is that we're kind of either holding steady, if not being on a decline. So that stuff matters to recruits. If we're all going after the same 3-star player, low 4-star player, and everything that they read online, all the takes that they see on social media are positive towards one school and negative towards the other, we all know how easily influenced the young mind can be. Last year, despite finishing with a better record, Purdue curb stomped the Illini. And 100%, I believe, that has had effect on recruiting. We can't let that happen again. Brett needs to make sure he's locked in and focused on Purdue this upcoming season and not let his mentee, his Padawan, go 2-0 against Brett. I genuinely think that if they don't get this Purdue game, all of a sudden, Brett's seat goes from neutral to maybe warm. It's that important of a game. And anyone who watches the show knows how highly I think of Brett. I think he's the exact guy this type of program needs. And unfortunately, it's just going to require a lot of patience on behalf of us fans. But he can't let Purdue pass you by. Purdue and Indiana have a lot of energy in their program. The same type of energy Illinois had 3 seasons ago. And it looked like we were going to go somewhere with that energy. We finished 5-7 his first season, but very close to making a bowl game. His second season, we started off 7-1. Inarguably one of the best teams in the Big Ten. I think we were the best team in the Big Ten West, clearly, but we fumbled it. And last year, 5-7 again, and you're talking about 2 or 3 games that could have gone in any sort of direction. and we could have been bowling. That could have been 3 straight bowling seasons, which for Illinois is unheard of. But what do we have to show for it? Just 1 bowl season out of 3. And really, if I'm being completely honest with it, and I have proof in my own interactions, both on Twitter, at IlliniCast, and even the chat here, some of you have voiced your displeasure. A lot of that momentum is gone. That's why I'm saying this 4th season for Brett is going to be a huge one, a monumental one. Every game is going to matter to get to 6 wins. I think there's one game that matters more than any other, and that is beating Ryan Walters and the Purdue Boilermakers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back once again. If you're here with me this long, again, this next message is for you. We've started a new SUBTEXT community. The link is going to be in the description. It's a way for you to really directly get involved in the show. You can talk about what you want me to talk about on the show. Are there certain topics that you find interesting? Whenever I have guests upcoming on the show, you're going to be able to have the opportunity to ask the questions yourself. So if that's something you're interested in, I think it's a 14-day free trial. There's zero obligation to anything. Just consider it. Be supporting the program, and you'd be supporting me. Speaking of guests, obviously yesterday was Tuesday's episode, and all of you were clamoring and wondering where the mighty Big Ten Ted was, but we couldn't make our schedules work. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't make it work today. I got to give the fans what they want, Ted. How are you?
Here we are. I'm great. It's always great to be here on a Baked and Ted Wednesday now, but regardless of what day of the week it is, it's always good to be here.
I just saw you had a bold predictions video on your channel, which was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, it's seeing videos like that that are really kind of that reminder that football season is just right around the corner at this point.
It is, man. It is. I think my first season preview it drops the same day the video game comes out, which is the 19th. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like, as we're recording, it's 9 or 10 days away, which is crazy to me. So yeah, it's the next month, right? On the calendar, we're going to be playing some football games. So, you know, that whole wishing away summer thing, it gets more difficult every single time every single week come on this program, right? Because that's when I know 7 days have gone by when I come back on Locked On Illini. But, you know, it's starting to sink in a little bit, you know, where, you know, you start to see season preview magazines start to come out and everything. So it's a very, very exciting time of year. So get those last cookouts, get those last summer activities in, because it's going to be fall before you know it.
I agree. Ted, what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, these interconference games, because we talked about out-of-conference games last week. So the biggest in-conference games, because every year you would think the number one game is Ohio State, Michigan. And it's still going to be an extremely important game. It will probably determine who goes to Indianapolis, at least one of the teams that goes to Indianapolis this season. But Ohio State, Oregon really tops my list in terms of games inside the conference. That's October 12th, Autzen Stadium. If I'm predicting right now, it's probably Big Ten Saturday night on NBC. It'll be either that or the mid-afternoon on CBS. And, you know, both of these teams have just loaded up for this year, right? You know, we know what Ohio State has been for, 20 to 25 years, right? It's just another rinse and repeat. You win 10 games. They're an elite football program. And they've been ultra motivated by what has happened the last 3 years. And they were clearly ultra motivated by Michigan going undefeated and winning winning the national championship. They haven't won one since 1997. But yeah, so that's, I think, when you look at Ohio State and when you look at Oregon, these are teams that are spending NIL money to bring in the Caleb Downs, the Will Howards of the world. And then on the Oregon side, bringing in the Dylan Gabriels and the Derek Harmons and the Evan Stewarts and the Jabbar Muhammads of the world. So these are teams that have dipped into free agency, but to put another NFL term on it, they draft pretty well. They recruit pretty well as well. So that's, I think, the game. And it's right smack dab in the middle of the season. That's when we're really going to start to find out, okay, who's the leader in the clubhouse this season in the Big Ten Conference? Because everybody's looking at the Buckeyes and the Ducks as the two top teams in the league. Okay, it might not be that simple when all is said and done when we get to the end of this thing, but that's going to tell us a lot, right? Because I think what happens in that game is going to have a tremendous domino effect one way or the other. Is it going to be the West Coast team that takes out the ultimate Big Ten power in Ohio State, or are the Buckeyes going to be able to run over what the Ducks have on defense? So that's really the first game that I have that is a must-see, and that result's really going to determine what happens the rest of the year.
And just to kind of piggyback on your thoughts, yeah, I mean, that's going to have a monumental storyline in the sense where Oregon can come into this conference and really establish themselves saying, hey, you know, we're Oregon and we are, I mean, obviously they're recruiting like crazy over the last couple of weeks from what I've seen. So like on par with what the Ohio States have been doing over the past couple seasons. But if they are able to take on the Buckeyes, the perceived favorite, in the conference, you know, arguably the number one team in the country, and win, that kind of shows that, hey, we may be the new guy, but you guys need to adjust to us as opposed to the other way around.
Dan Lanning hasn't won any big games either. That's a big bugaboo for him. I love Dan. I think by the time we're talking next year, he's at the very least top 2 coach in this conference. I firmly believe that. I think a lot of people have him, including myself, a little bit lower on their preseason coaching rankings list because he just hasn't coached the Big Ten before. He's only been a head coach for 2 seasons, right? And he's won 1 game against his rivals, Washington and Oregon State. Right over the last 2 seasons, his 2 years as head coach at Oregon. So you're gonna have to win some of these big games. Doesn't have a lot of ranked wins, right, on his resume as well. He's gonna get the opportunity because I think when we go further down this big in-conference games list, how about November 2nd is a heck of a day for Big Ten football. How about Oregon traveling to Michigan to face off the Wolverines in Ann Arbor? Big question for Oregon and a lot of the West Coast teams. Will they be able to be physical? There's no more physical team in this conference and maybe the country than the Michigan Wolverines. And I think they're going to be, and I think Michigan's going to lean even more into that this year because they don't have a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy back there. So they're really going to load up and try to be physical, both on offense and on defense. I can't wait because I know that Ohio State matchup is difficult and Ohio State has what they have on offense, but I think a lot of people are kind of tucking Michigan into that second tier right now when that defense is a nasty defense, man. Like you're going in there in early November to Ann Arbor, Michigan, not saying it's going to be 10 degrees, but it's not going to be 60, right? I'll certainly put it that way. And we know Oregon, they can deal with it. They're in the Pacific Northwest. We get it. But that's going to be that Big Ten type of football game because I think at some point in time, Oregon is going to have to muck it up. They're going to have to be physical because for as much talent as they have, there's going to be a game when it's just not all clicking. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. And this is a game that I look at where I think it's maybe going to be that game where maybe they're coming off, maybe they're a little bit rusty, something like that, and maybe Michigan could take advantage of that. So that's a huge game because if Oregon is able to beat Ohio State and then they come back and lose to Michigan, you know, that really kind of mucks things up as well in terms of the standings. Another one I think that could muck the standings up, Penn State and Ohio State, right, is what Penn State, because they don't have Oregon on the schedule. They don't have Michigan on the schedule. So if they lose to Ohio State by, let's say, more than 2 scores, we're in the same boat again. Even if they go 11-1, even if they beat Wisconsin, even if they beat USC, even if they beat West Virginia, some of the other teams on their schedule, like we're in the same boat. James Franklin can't win the big one. You know, they can beat almost everybody else in the conference, but they can't beat the Ohio States and the Michigans and now Oregon maybe coming into that tier as well. So that's a huge game. If Penn State goes and they lose by a score or a field goal or something, okay, maybe you're a little bit less hard on James Franklin at that point. But then again, you look at it on the flip side. This is not a game a lot of people are looking at. It's tough to go into Happy Valley and win a football game. And when you look at this matchup, what if Penn State is able to come out in the winning end? That just because everybody's got Ohio State, Oregon, and maybe Michigan. But if Penn State is able to win that game, that flips this thing completely on its head because everybody has Ohio State as a national championship caliber team. Now, all of a sudden, and it depends how they do it, right? If Drew Aller is that quarterback that takes another step in Andy Kotelnicki's offense and all of the other things that kind of stem off of that, like if that happens, now all of a sudden we're talking about Penn State as a national championship type of team, a playoff team that can make a run to the semifinals or beyond. So there's a lot of games, I think, on this schedule that stand out as like, well, if this happens, then this. There's a lot of cause and effect, and there's a lot of games that I kind of got circled on the calendar as well. I think you got to throw in a Nebraska game. I think Nebraska is a very interesting team. I think that's a team that if everything clicks, they could certainly go on a run this season. And I think the easy one would be the Black Friday game against Iowa. But I'm circling as almost a dark horse in this category. Nebraska at USC. I know Nebraska and Ohio State would be the very easy pick. But what about Nebraska and USC down the stretch? Right now, my gut is telling me both of these football teams are 8-4 type of teams. Mm-hmm. There's a chance that the loser of this game is sitting right there at 7-5. Now, considering the way both of these programs have been, I believe Nebraska would be better at 7-5 than USC would be better at 7-5 as well. But these are the type of games that USC needs to win if they want to take a step up as a program in their first year in the Big Ten. Because if you look at some of the games that the Trojans have in the Big Ten, they got to go to Michigan. They got to play Wisconsin. At Minnesota won't be a cakewalk on October 5th. They got to play Penn State, at Maryland, all the way across the country. Rutgers on a Friday night. Nebraska at the end of the year, I think that's going to be a bigger game than people think. I think USC and the Huskers are both going to have winning records at that point in time. And I think that's going to be a pretty big game coming on down the stretch as well. Like I'm just looking at this helmet schedule and I'm like, there's so many games. We could talk for 30, 40, 50 more minutes because there's big time games and, ones that maybe people don't have completely circled, like an early Rutgers and Washington on a Friday night stands out to me possibly as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to kind of look at this, but I think we all have Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan, Oregon, and Ohio State. I think those are the top four, and then you get into those Nebraska versus USC and maybe some of those other big matchups.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the matchup you mentioned about Penn State and Ohio State, just because I had my most recent episode of Big Ten Show was with Zach Seiko from Locked On Nittany Lions, and I took a look at their roster, and I really feel like they're kind of being slept on right now. I think maybe because of the new teams coming in, but a lot of people had big aspirations for Penn State's team last year, and I had said that, you know what, I think this team needs one more year of Drew Aller maturing, and let's see what they can do next year. Well, next year is here now. And as you said, they got to avoid most of the other juggernauts in the conference. And so if they come out of Ohio State with the victory, you're talking about a potential undefeated season. And like you said, you're talking about pressure on James Franklin and Penn State in that playoff, unlike they've seen in a really, really long time.
It's really, for Penn State, it comes down to Drew Aller for me. Yep. Right? If Drew Aller can throw the football, and if this offense can actually push the football down the field, have a threat, in the deep passing game, whether it's Julian Fleming or Harrison Wallace or whoever it is down the field, that opens up this whole offense, right? This running back tandem, there's more lanes to be able to run through because there's less guys creeping up in the box. And, there's so many football X's and O's types of things that happen. If Drew Aller can be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And if Andy Kotelnicki opens up this box that Mike Yurcich had him nailed into, then all of a sudden this Penn State team, I think, is very dangerous. But, and I agree with you in what you said and what Zach has said about this Penn State team. This defense is going to be nasty. I think they got the best pass rush tandem in the country with Abdul Carter on one side, Danny Dennis Sutton. And this is linebacker U after all. And they are still very good at line. I love that move that they made, put in Abdul. He put on some weight coming off the edge on the defensive line. And then what they have at linebacker, they're really high. Antonio Rojas, Dominic DeLuca, Kobe King is in there as well. So I like what they have on the defensive side of the football. But to kind of wrap things up, there's a few games in here that don't sleep on. Don't sleep on the season opener at West Virginia. All right, Garrett Green of the Mountaineers. That's a pretty good Big 12 football team in there as well. Don't sleep going on the road to USC. Right, that's going to be a battle for USC as well. But we'll see if the Trojans can throw the ball around. At Wisconsin. Okay, if Wisconsin is going to pull off one of these games at Camp Randall, it could be this Penn State team. Wisconsin is kind of a team, maybe on a lower level, a tier below, that people are sleeping on as well. And that's a really good football team. I think that's a team 6-6, 7-5 the last couple of regular seasons that a lot of people have kind of pushed down a peg or two. Luke Fickell might be coming back up here in year number 2. So it's going to be an exciting season. So many great games. And yeah, Penn State, certainly a team that's kind of lying in the weeds right now.
Big Ten Ted, thank you so much. Before you go, let the folks know once again where they can find your stuff.
At Big Ten Ted over there on Twitter, YouTube with the same name over there as well. July 19th, that's when 18 straight days of season previews kick off, kicking things off with the 3-time defending Big Ten champion, defending national champion, Michigan Wolverines. Got team experts and guests from all sorts of networks and reporters across the country. So it's going to be a lot of fun and looking forward to football season, that's for sure.
No, I can't wait. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Special thanks once again to Big Ten Ted for joining us for another week talking Illini football. Special thanks to all of you for tuning in for another episode. At the time of this recording, I think we're at like 725 subs. And again, it's incredible the speed that this community is growing. I'm so grateful to all of you. Again, if you don't mind, on the way out, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You know what's crazy is I saw before I recorded this video, 71% of the people watching this video are not subscribed. I'm glad you're watching. Don't get me wrong. But again, just hit that little button and, it really helps us out, especially with YouTube and the algorithm. That's going to be it today. And we'll see you later on in the week where we're going to talk a little Terrence Shannon on the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball. ILL. Love you guys.